I just want to say how honoured I am to be associated with the university and to come from the world that I come from, which is the world of news reporting, which is all about action and very tight deadlines and experience, into the world of ideas. Because I know modern universities are very vocationally focused, this one in particular, very tight budgets. I often forget this, but it is a world of ideas. When I was at university, what I valued most about it, what I remember most about it, it's more than 30 years on from when I finished my degree, it is the privilege of being in a world of ideas, and if you want them to be as pure ideas as possible and as big ideas as possible. I want to say that specifically to the undergraduates who are here. Make no apologies for demanding that from the university as well. But in the spirit of that, I am going to try and talk about the big things that are going on, and one specific big idea that inspires and guides me as I do my day job reporting, and it's, I'm afraid, takes you out of the world of Wolverhampton on a not windy and a very nice, actually, if a bit brisk and cold, let's call it spring night, to Russia in the 1930s. The prisoner can't walk, he shuffles. He has chronic heart disease and clinical depression. And the tone of his letters after 8 years in prison have changed. And instead of demands for books on mathematics, he's just resigned to his fate. There's no way I can force myself to think systematically, says this prisoner, about any of the scientific topics I was working on before my illness. To think scientifically at all without actively working on books and materials and with these headaches is very difficult. But he doesn't need to worry much longer, because on the 17th of September 1938, on the exact day his 8-year prison sentence expires, the prisoner is tried again in secret, convicted and executed by firing squad. Thus perished one of the giants of 20th century economics, a man whose global reputation had already secured his election to the Econometric Society alongside globally influential thinkers who even now are not household names, but names to those of us who study this. Alongside Keynes, Schumpeter, Hayek, Gini, Irving Fisher was this man, Nikolai Kondratiev. And his contribution to economics, which I'm going to talk about tonight, was to study and document what we call long cycles or long waves. Well, what had he done to merit execution by Stalin's secret police? Technically, they'd accused him of launching a rival party to the communists. He'd been a minister in a previous government, but he was a left-winger. But they accused him of setting up a workers' and peasants' party. Now, the slight problem here is, if he looks a bit like a bespectacled mathematician, that's what he was. Setting up a rival party was not really what he was up to. And indeed, it later became clear that the secret police had invented the party and the plot, and that the name of the party they'd discovered in a science fiction novel. But such was Stalin's Russia that didn't matter. The real answer why they shot him, and he is the only one of the great economists of the last century, as far as I know, to be executed, the real answer lay in the ideas. The first inconvenient idea Kondratiev had was that market socialism, above all in agriculture, would be more effective than state socialism. So collectivizing agriculture was a bad idea, he said. But the most important thing was he was the first person to really demonstrate the existence of long waves or long cycles in economic history, to demonstrate that beyond the short-term business cycles we study in a place like the business school, lasting 7 to 10 years, or 3-year cycles of inventory replacement, there are 50-year cycles whose turning points coincide with major structural changes within capitalism and coincide with major conflicts. I believe we are at such a turning point, and that Kondratiev's work if properly understood and if rescued from various people who have misunderstood him and misused him, can help us to situate the crisis that we're in, the one that began with Lehman Brothers, into a long-range picture of where capitalism has been and where it's going. And for the aficionados, for the people who are not completely boggle-eyed and don't know what I'm talking about, those who know a little bit about this, I think he can help us for a specific and perverse reason, because the wave pattern he was trying to describe has actually been disrupted recently by policy action that looked like it's done the equivalent of splitting the atom, of defying all previous patterns. Policy action which looked like it had created a kind of golden age, but which can no longer be sustained. I think we're at the beginning of a long, disrupted wave of development, which means that all predictive bets are off as to the outcome of the crisis we're in, even before we factor in the external shocks that the planet and its demographics have to throw at us as we try and come out of the crisis we've lived through for the past 5 years. So, was the post-Lehman Brothers recession big? It was big. Industrial production fell globally to 13% below its previous peak. World trade, 20% down at the trough of the recession of 2009. Stock markets, the average value of stock markets halved in a period of less than 9 months. Why did it happen? Well, for both left and the right, the immediate cause is seen as the decision by Western states to deregulate banking and print money after the dot-com crash in 2000 and after 9/11, at the same time as allowing the financial economy to dominate the non-financial economy. And this, the story goes, created, as with a whodunit, the means, the motive and the opportunity for what we call the structured finance bubble, the thing that Lehman Brothers became. Of course, it also created the means, motive and opportunity for real crime. We now know how much, in fact we don't know how much, but we know a lot more about how much real crime was perpetrated during that boom, when bankers were effectively being told by politicians that it was their duty to get rich through speculation, because their speculation helped fuel and liquefy the market for cheap credit, and cheap credit had become the driver of economic growth, offsetting the problem that wages had just not risen in many Western countries in real terms at all for decades, above all in America. Once you acknowledge the centrality of this problem of cheap money, easy money, you then have to search for the cause of it, and that leads you to what we call the problem of the global imbalances. So you get a global division of labour that allowed countries like America to print money and run high deficits, while China and other exporting countries took the other side of the deal. They took the money, they lent the money, they did the producing while the Americans consumed. Now, with hindsight, it's become clear to us that if you position yourself, and it's clear to us as Britain, as a high consumption economy with relatively high living standards, but if you live off borrowed money, and then if you respond to every crisis and every threat to that arrangement by boosting the demand for cheap credit, then you're going to come a cropper quite soon, and it's not going to be very nice. Now, I've just slightly lost my way. Just allow me 1 second to find this thing, because it's once you've lost it, you've lost it. So what we have now is not just a crisis of, we don't just have a crisis of the economy, and we don't just have a crisis of the private sector. We have effectively a sovereign debt crisis. So sovereign debt crisis we see in the UK, we see the sovereign debt crisis ripping through Europe. We see America with the sovereign debt crisis that it calls the budget crisis that is coming along. So the crisis of the private sector and the recession became a sovereign debt crisis, and that is still with us. Just excuse me for 1 second while I reset this, because it's annoying me. as they say, talk among yourselves, because otherwise it's going to be a lot of what we call improvisation, because I'm hardly at the beginning of this. Let's catch up.